from the blackest corners of your mind, they call, pulling you deep into shadow, twisting your senses, keeping you from sleep. It's time to face your darkest fears. This is Tales to Terrify. Good evening, children of the night, and welcome. As I mentioned last week, we're on the hunt for some bite-sized frights to add to the show. Flash fiction tales of terror that run 2,000 words or less. It's a great way to flex those horror writing muscles without having to break too big of a sweat. Visit talestoterrify.com/submissions for the details, and make sure to bring those perfectly penned little frights with you. I promise they'll be well cared for. Our deepest, darkest thanks goes out this week to our newest patron, Lainey Bug. Thank you for joining us in feeding these sinister shadows, Lainey. Your generosity and support is crucial in helping us not only spread our twisted tales, but properly compensate those that bring them to life. So thank you, from us and the Void. Speaking of twisted tales, we've got just such a creature lurking in the wings right now. Best not to keep it waiting. Our tale tonight comes to us from C.R. Langille. C.R. Langille spends many Saturday afternoons watching monster movies with her mom. It wasn't long before she started crafting her own nightmares to share. She's a retired disabled veteran with a deep love for weird and creepy tales. She is a member of the Horror Writers Association, the DEI chair for the League of Utah Writers, earned her MFA writing popular fiction from Seton Hill University in 2014, and is the owner of Timber Ghost Press. Children of the Night, join me for C.R. Langille's The Deep Timber, first published in They Walk Among Us, a collection of Utah horror, April 2024.
Oh, aspen tree, what have you seen? What do you see when you look at me? Utah Territory, 1884. I couldn't feel my fingers anymore, which meant starting a fire was going to be harder than shooting the ass off a fly at 50 paces. Whether or not we should even light a fire was still under some debate, as the matter of Gerald's posse and their current location was the topic on all our minds. However, freezing to death was becoming more and more likely, and the option of warmth was becoming more and more desirable. I pulled my old bearskin coat a little tighter around my body. It used to be my dad's before me, and his dad's before him. He used to tell me that Grandpa Rick killed and skinned a grizzly that attacked him up in the north with nothing but a hunting knife. Who knows if that story was true or not, but the coat kept me from dying as we rode further up the damned mountain. The aspens gave way to pine as we climbed up in elevation. It became colder, but at least I didn't have to have all those damn aspens staring at me. The way the knots looked like eyes sent shivers up my back like they were judging me, staring at my soul or something. I urged my horse up to the front of the line. He gave a huff, but trotted through the snow. Old Tommy was at the lead, followed by the Rockgut twins, Colt and Walter. Trailing behind us was that Navajo friend of Tommy's named Sanny, I didn't think Sandy was going to make it much farther. He'd taken a bullet in the leg a few days back as we made dust out of Evanston. That wound had started to sour, and none of his Navajo tricks were making a difference. Old Tommy had his hat pulled low and was smoking his pipe. He cast me an angry look as I neared. "Think it's smart lighting that pipe of yours? I bet they can smell it over the next canyon." He grunted and shrugged his shoulders. "I reckon Gerald and his boys are just as cold and lost as we are up in this timber. If I'm going to freeze to death, might as well do so with a nice warm pipe full of tobacco." Tommy wasn't wrong. We'd gotten turned around half a dozen times already. The lodge poles made it hard to navigate, and if it hadn't been for Sandy, I'm sure we'd have been chewing up dirt going in circles. However, Sandy wasn't saying much anymore. Not that the man was a chatterbox to begin with. His skin was looking mighty pale, and he had that stare I'd seen plenty of times before. It was the look you'd get when death was on your tail. "Should probably set up camp soon." Tommy nodded. "Sure, let's get it done before the sun sets." We picked a spot near the mouth of a small draw. A little creek cut through the snow and provided a bit of background noise. While it covered our sounds, it made it difficult to hear anyone coming. Tommy strode up to me, still puffing on that pipe. I didn't like the look in his eye. His twisted mind was churning. "Best if you can take an extra blanket and go up the hill a bit, be our lookout for the night." I took my hat off and shook some of the snow off the brim. "Send one of the Rockgut twins. Hell, they'd probably think it was some grand bandit adventure." Ever since Tommy brought them into the fold, they'd gone on and on about living the good life, free from the law. I think they actually believed that being an outlaw meant wandering from town to town, meeting a different senorita each night, and drinking their fill of cheap whiskey. They were sorely disappointed when it meant staying on the outskirts of most places so as to not get noticed and try not to get sick from dirty water. "I need someone with their wits about them tonight. Sandy's about to keel over, and those two morons have already started into the spirits." The Rockgut twins were singing a song about some scantily dressed whore or something, and giggling up a storm. I let out a sigh as it was going to be a cold night. "Now if you see something, sneak on back and let us know. If you can't get back in time," I held up a hand to stop him. I know, shoot once in the air." "Good man. Now head on up there. I'll try and spell you in a while." While it was kind of him to say, it was a lie. Tommy would be snoring before too long, and I would be on my own. I made my way up the hill. It wasn't too far, but it was steep, and before too long I was huffing and puffing. The cool air burned my lungs and put a feather in the back of my throat. I didn't want to be drenched in sweat and die frozen under a pine tree, so I took a moment to rest about halfway up. The Rockgut's song floated up from below, and I shook my head. Those bastards would be the death of us if they didn't keep it down. Hopefully Tommy was right, and Gerald's gang was just as lost as we were. But my granddaddy always said, hope was fool's gold. Nice, but worthless. I was about to start my ascent again, when the snap of a tree from above echoed through the draw. I ducked down and drew my pistol. It was loud enough it even got the Rockgut twins' attention, and their song trailed off with the wind. I glanced back down to camp. Tommy and the others were all staring up at me, their weapons drawn. After a moment, Tommy shooed me onward with a wave of his hand. I crawled up the hillside, slow and easy. I didn't want to be gasping or coughing like a lunger when I got to the top. I needed my wits about me and my aim to be true. I was almost at the crest when another branch snapped, this time closer. I stopped and listened. My heartbeat drummed in my ears, accompanied by heavy breaths. I couldn't keep the slight shake from my hand as I took those final few steps, unsure of what lay in wait for me up above. My brain tried to say it was nothing, just old branches giving up the fight against the weight of the snow. Hell, I'd even take Gerald and his posse. Yet my gut screamed at me. saying it was something worse than hired guns or weather-laden sticks. My gut told me to run and never stop until these damned mountains were long behind me. I inched my way to the top and peeked over. There was nobody there, just trees and more snow. A couple of ravens sat on a branch of a tall pine and stared at me like I was some fool sent for their amusement. Perhaps I was. I walked around to where I thought the sound may have come from and found the source. A dead pine had fallen over, a widowmaker. After a moment, I walked back to the edge and waved to Tommy and the gang. The Rockgut twins started singing and laughing like nothing had ever happened. Tommy nodded and emptied his pipe into the snow. Sandy stared up at me with wide eyes. Even from the distance, I could see the fear. I set myself up in a spot far away from the fallen tree. It was stupid, but I didn't want to be anywhere near that thing when the sun decided to set. I bundled up with my blankets, but as soon as I stopped moving, the chill set in. I debated whether or not I should light a fire. It would give away my position, but on the other hand, I wouldn't be any good as a lookout if I died from the cold. The dead see things. They can see you. I don't know where those words had come from. I hadn't heard anything like that before. It had come from nowhere, the idea forming in my head and burrowing deep. Perhaps I overheard Sandy talking beside a campfire one night. That had to be it. He was always rambling about spiritual nonsense when he thought nobody was listening. I rubbed my forehead. A small ache had started just behind my eye. I took a drink from my water skin. The water was cold, just like everything else, but it soothed my parched throat. The water skin was almost empty, and I'd have to remember to fill it in the morning before we broke camp and left. Getting the fire going took some time, but it was worth it. The warmth from the flames brought my fingers back from the brink and staved off the chill enough to keep me alive. The Rockgut twins started singing louder. Their voices rode the wind and swept past my ears with a slight warble. Generally in tune, it was easy to mistake the singing of the Rockgut twins as just one person. However, this song was disjointed, broken. Tommy must have got after the two because the singing stopped just as quickly as it had come, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. Even with the biting cold nipping at my nose and seeping into my legs, it was hard to keep my eyes open. Being on the run for the past couple of days had drained me. I kept the fire going, but the rhythmic dance of the flames was beckoning me beyond the wall of the sleep. At one point, I nodded off, only to jolt awake moments later. The crunch of a boot in the snow did the trick. I scrambled to my feet and drew my pistol. "Who's there?" I pulled the hammer back and pointed it into the darkness. "If I had wanted to kill you, you'd be dead already." Sandy stepped from the shadows and into the firelight. I let out a sigh and holstered my weapon. "Good God, don't you know it's dangerous to go slinking about?" Sandy smiled, though it was strained. "I find it's equally as dangerous to let folks know I'm there." I shrugged my shoulders. "Fair enough." I motioned him to the fire. "I brought coffee." "Well, why didn't you say so? I could hug you." Sandy shuffled closer and sat on the ground with a groan. I dug my tin cup from my satchel and held it out so he could pour me some coffee from the pot he'd carried with him. At that moment, Sandy was a godsend, an angel sent from the heavens to deliver ambrosia upon the faithful. Except he wasn't an angel, I wasn't faithful, and the coffee, while hot, wasn't anywhere close to the food of the gods. "How's the wound?" "How do you think?" I nodded. "Maybe we can get you to a doc or something in Ashley." "That's what I like about you. You keep hold of hope like it is your last gold nugget." I wasn't sure how to take that, as I had a problem holding on to money. You could ask my wife about that. One of the reasons she took the girls and went back east to her parents' house. I'm sure her parents gave her an earful about how they knew it would turn out that way and she was better off without me. I was sure she'd take me back if I could get enough money to keep us comfortable. Old Tommy kept talking about a plan to rob the payroll and making it big. It sounded nice, but I couldn't help but wonder how my little girls were doing. Their laughs were worth more than silver or gold. This will all be over soon. Sandy must have seen the darkness on my face. I took a sip of coffee and let the warm liquid roll down my throat. I hope so. Hey, what's your deal anyway? Why are you riding with Tommy? Sandy had been with Tommy since before I joined up. Tommy treated the man with respect and deferred to his wisdom in many situations. I once saw Tommy knock the teeth out of a cowpoke who made an offhand remark about Sandy's heritage. I didn't much care where a person was from, Navajo, Apache, Mexican. Hell, as long as they didn't try to kill me and pulled their weight, people were fine by me. I am here because of my brother. It was Sandy's turn to wear a dark mask. He lowered his head and stared at the flames of my small fire. I'm not following. Where's your brother? Sandy placed the coffee pot near the fire and folded his arms into his blanket. He died 4 years ago. We were running from a posse much like today, only it was him who took a bullet in the stomach. I'm sorry. I told him it was foolish to follow the path of greed. Nothing good would come of it. He would not be swayed by my words nor the words of our mother. So I followed him to protect him. I failed. Now I ride with Tommy because I have nowhere else to go. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. A few moments later, the rock guts started singing again. I reckon the whiskey was starting to settle in their blood and it made them anxious. Sandy closed his eyes. We must not attract attention. Because of Gerald's posse? Because there is something in this woods that wants us. Sandy stood with a groan. We should not have wandered from the trail. My people tell stories of foolish boys who wandered too far into the timber. The trees. They watch and wait. He winced at his first step and wandered back down the trail. He had left me the coffee, which was kind, yet I couldn't help but think of things other than the coffee. There was a small stain of blood in the snow where Sandy had been sitting. The Rockgut twins finally stopped their singing. Hopefully, Tommy knocked some sense into those two. About an hour later, I had burned through the pot of coffee and it had started to work its dark magic on me. I got up, careful to keep my blanket around my body, although it wasn't doing much good with the biting cold. I shuffled off a few feet and answered the call of nature. There was a crunch of feet in the snow. I turned and drew my pistol, still hanging free in the wind. It was cold, but I had other things to deal with. Standing in the dark was a tall figure. The firelight hit the person's eyes just right, and they flashed, almost like a cougar or something. It happened so quick I couldn't focus on it. Whoever it was had wild hair sticking out in all directions, and smelled awful, like shit and sweat. It had to be one of the rock guts. What you doing up here? Did Tommy send you up? No answer. He just stood there and stared at me. It took a moment to do up my pants and wrap the blanket around me again. Well, what is it? You drunk? You can't sit up here on watch and be blasted out of your skull. Go back down there and get some rest. Still, he stood there. I was about to walk over and push whichever one of those damn twins it was back down the hillside, when he turned and walked away. As he did, His joints made sounds like old wood, groaning, or the grind of bone on bone. I went back to my fire and sat back down. I kept my gun out, resting on my leg. There were more sounds coming from the darkness, like the trees moving, not just swaying in the wind as the wind wasn't blowing, but like they were getting up and walking around. I dreamt I was surrounded by old trees, and they were all staring down at my corpse. They whispered things I couldn't hear. Those creaks and groans of branch and bone filled the sky, and soon I couldn't hear anything at all. Anything but the screams of Colt cutting up the hillside. It was the screams that woke me. My face flushed with heat when I realized I'd fallen asleep on watch. If old Tommy found out, I was a dead man. I ran over to the hillside and looked down at the camp. Colt was pacing around and running a hand through that patch of ginger mess he called hair. He was yelling about something about his brother missing. I ran down the hill and almost tripped on an exposed root. Sandy was sitting on a large boulder. He had a pained expression on his face and nodded as I walked by. "What's going on?" It was hard to get the words out. Being so high up in the mountains was taking a toll on my lungs. Old Tommy shot me a look that sent chills up my back even in the morning cold. Colt turned my way with a crazy look in his eye. A trail of dried drool ran down his chin, coupled with fresh tears that had chiseled a path down his grimy cheeks. He stumbled over to me, still drunk, and grabbed my shoulders. You were on watch. What happened to him?" I looked around, and it dawned on me. "Where's Walter?" Colt spun around in a circle and rubbed the back of his neck. His shoulder popped. "Those creaks and groans of branch and bone." "That's what I was asking you." Old Tommy stepped up and put an arm around Colt's shoulder. "It's okay. I'm sure he just wandered off in a drunken stupor. We'll find him. Hell, in this snow, it'll be easy to follow his tracks." Tracks? It had to have been Walter standing outside of my campfire last night. "Hold on. I think he came up last night. I thought he wandered back down to camp." I took off running back up the hill. At one point I was crawling on all fours, it was so steep. My lungs burned. I should have taken my time, but if I could find the tracks, perhaps I could redeem myself for falling asleep. They didn't know I passed out, but I knew, and that was enough. It wasn't the first time I'd failed at my responsibilities. I missed my girls. I got up to the top and almost fell over as the world spun. I sucked in big old gulps of air until I could finally breathe, then hurried over to where I had camped. The pot of coffee sat next to a pile of ashes. I found my tracks and patch of yellow snow, and it wasn't too hard to find the other tracks. I wished I hadn't, though. The tracks showed bare feet with spots of blood. Whoever made the tracks had an irregular stride, steps sometimes close together, other times longer than a normal person should have been able to step. I followed them away from my sight to a patch of thick timber. Lodgepole pines stretched up into the sky like rows upon rows of jagged teeth. The footprints stopped at the edge of the trees and disappeared. I looked all around, but couldn't find them again. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and the chirping birds went silent. Some of the trees swayed lazily in the breeze. There was a low moan of wood as a pine moved against another. Deep in the woods, something cracked like thunder. "Well, did you find him?" I jumped at the voice and spun around. Old Tommy let out a chuckle and held his hands up. "Just me. Good Lord, Tommy, make some noise next time." A wave of dizziness hit me. I leaned up against one of the trees to steady myself. There was something sticky on the tree, and it was warm and made me want to throw up. I pulled my hand away, expecting sap, but it was some sort of black goop. I dropped to my knee and grabbed a handful of snow to wash it away. It left a black stain on my palm and made my hand tingle. "Well?" I looked up at Tommy. "Well, what?" "Did you find him?" "No, followed these tracks to the tree line," I said, pointing behind me. Tommy turned and looked. "What tracks?" I growled a bit and stood. "These tracks, are you blind?" I turned to show him, but the tracks were gone, never there. "What in the hell?" Tommy placed a hand on my shoulder. He had a genuine look of concern in his eye. "It was... Never mind. Look, I think he went in there." "In with the timber, in with the bones, creaking and groaning. Listen to the moans." I rubbed at my forehead. "Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" "Nothing," I said. "Well, if you think he went that way, then that's good enough for me. More than likely that damn fool wandered off drunk last night and is frozen to death somewhere. Take Colt and go look for him." I shook my head. No way was I taking that crazy drunk-ass fool. "I'll go alone. It'll be quicker and quieter." Tommy's eyes went dark for a moment. I don't think I stuttered. "Take Colt. Otherwise, he'll be yelling like a madman all through these woods. Be back before midday, whether you find Walter or not. We're moving then." I sighed. I knew from experience that I wouldn't win the argument, and trying to do so would only make Tommy angry. When he got angry, it was like stepping into a pit of vipers. You could possibly make it out unscathed, but more than likely you were going to get bit and probably die. "Fine, send him up. I'm not crawling up and down that hillside anymore." "Good boy." Heat flashed in my cheeks. I hated it when he called me a good boy, like I was a damn dog or something. I watched him walk away and contemplated putting a bullet in his back. My hand was already on my gun when I realized what I was doing. I let out a blast of breath that I'd been holding in. I couldn't figure out where that thought had come from. It wasn't like me. The world spun and I puked up coffee. It was black like the goop on the tree. It wasn't too much longer before Colt's mumbling and bellows echoed up the hill to my ears. It was going to be a long trek through the woods. I wiped my face and waited for Colt. We made our way through the trees. At first, Colt called out for Walter, and it took me threatening to cave in his skull for him to stop. "We'll bring down Gerald and his posse for sure if you keep hollering like that." "We need to find Walter." I rubbed my forehead. A giant pain was brewing, and I wanted to get somewhere warm and sleep for a week. Instead, I was stuck in the timber with this idiot. "We'll find him, but we need to do it quieter, or else it won't matter if we find him or not." Colt looked at me with crazy eyes. "It don't matter if we die. We need to find him." I couldn't respond to that kind of crazy. There wasn't anything anyone could say, so I stayed quiet. As long as I kept moving, I stayed warm enough. I kept that wool blanket wrapped around me, but whenever we'd stop to rest or listen, that biting cold slithered into my bones. It was during one of those stops that the cawing of crows broke through the silence. It was more than just chattering birds or warning caws. They were announcing a feast. Something was dead. "Come on," I said. We made our way through the trees, but they grew closer and closer together, and there was a lot of deadfall on the ground. I felt like I wasn't supposed to go any further, but I wasn't about to let some fallen trees tell me what to do. I always did what I wanted. "That's why we can't stay with you anymore. I'm taking the girls." I shook my head to clear the voices and pressed forward. The trees tried like hell to keep us out, but we had cold determination on our side. We scrambled across a large dead pine and broke through to a clearing. It wasn't very large. Hell, I could have probably thrown a tomahawk from one tree line to the other, and I wasn't even that good at it. But it wasn't the open meadow that held my attention. No, it was the blood in the snow. There was tons of it, spread all over hell and back. The smell, dear Lord, the smell, was thick with the iron-like scent of blood. It had to be Gerald's posse. There was a campfire still smoking with bedrolls strewn about. Whatever happened had happened while they slept. I drew my pistol and moved to get a closer look. Colt followed close behind, his gun in hand as well. "What the hell happened here?" Colt asked. "I don't know. Where's everyone?" With all the blood, there had to be a body somewhere. I searched around, poking my head into a lone tent that had been set up near the trees. The side was ripped. Inside, the smell of death and shit hit me like a punch to the gut, and I about threw up. There wasn't a body, but there was a pile of entrails in the corner. I staggered out, coughing and covering my face. "Don't," I said as Colt wandered over to the tent. "You don't need to see that." He glared at me and went on ahead like a stubborn mule. A second later, he fell out of the tent with a wail. Jesus damn Christ, what is this?" "I don't know. Come on, though, that fire was going not too long ago. Let's see if we can find where they went." I walked around looking for tracks. With the snow, it wasn't hard to find them. It looked like they had run off through the woods. I motioned for Colt and set off after them. Not really sure why. It wasn't like it would do us any good if we found the posse. Yet there was something deep down inside that needed to know. Besides, they could have Walter. At the edge of the meadow, we found more tracks, different than the others. They were also barefoot, but there were a lot of them, at least a dozen sets. They circled the meadow, sticking to the tree line, and had that odd gait similar to the tracks where I had set up watch. We found their horses. They were all dead, lined up and missing their heads. Their heads hadn't been cut off. Something had ripped them off. Jagged bits of flesh and bone littered the ground. This time I did throw up. Colt stared at the horses with a wide-eyed look of someone who had lost their last ounce of sanity. A bit of drool ran down from the corner of his mouth, and his hands were shaking. "Come on, let's go," I said. Colt didn't respond, so I just grabbed his arm and pulled him with me. We needed to find his brother and get back to camp before old Tommy decided we weren't worth the trouble to stick around anymore. We followed the posse's tracks further into the woods. Whatever got them moving had lit a fire under their feet, for Gerald's boys had run from camp and hadn't stopped. Colt followed along, staring off at nothing. I'd seen that look before. Some of the men who had fought in the war had that same look sometimes. There was a loud crack and boom as if a tree had fallen nearby. Then another, and another. It was getting closer. I did what any sane man would have. I ran. Thankfully, Colt followed close behind. I ran as fast as I could and had to dodge trees and rocks with almost every step. The thing followed, crashing through the forest like a stampede of angry bison. I didn't look back. I couldn't. To do so would have broken me, for if I saw whatever it was that came for us, I knew I'd be a goner. I shouldered through some pines and found myself face to face with a rock wall. A breath later, Colt stumbled beside me. We were both gasping for air, sweat pouring down our faces. If the thing didn't kill us, the cold air would. "What now?" Colt asked. I pointed up and holstered my pistol. "We climb." The thing was getting closer, but I scrambled up the rock wall and somehow didn't slip and fall to my death. I could picture it in my mind's eye, falling and snapping my legs, laying there in the snow as the thing slowly devoured me. Those creaks and groans of branch and bone. Somehow I made it to the top, and instantly wished I hadn't. Sitting in the snow were the horses' heads. Right next to them were the heads of Gerald and his posse. Their eyes had been ripped out along with the skin around their mouths, giving them all horrible grins that would have sent shivers up Death's spine. Colt made it up right after me. He stopped before he crawled up all the way and stared at all the heads. Tears ran down his cheeks, and he kept mumbling something. I couldn't quite hear what it was, but did catch a word or two. The eyes in the aspens. What did you say? He stopped speaking and looked at me. Tell old Tommy I'm sorry. Before I could say anything else, he let go and fell off the rock wall. He fell to the earth with a sick thud and a crack. No, God damn it! Colt looked up at me, with blood coming from his nose and mouth. He opened his mouth to say something, but only let out a wet gurgle. He coughed, sending flecks of bloody spittle flying in all directions. Before I could even start to crawl back down, something grabbed him by the shoulder and dragged him into the trees. My heart froze, and my stomach dropped. There was a crack. Those creaks and groans of branch and bone. And then a tear. A moment later, Colt's head came rolling out into the clearing. I ran. I'm not sure how I found my way back to camp, or how I didn't freeze to death, but when I arrived I couldn't feel my hands or feet anymore. Sandy was by a campfire that was burning tall and hot. I stumbled over towards it and fell at his feet. I don't know what happened next, as everything went black. When I woke, I was back home, lying in my old rickety bed I had fashioned from a cedar. One good shake and the thing was going to fall apart. I kept meaning to fix it, or make a new one, a better one, but never got around to it. I was covered in sweat and felt hot, so I kicked off the blankets. The cool air touched my skin, and I lay in the bed staring at the old timber that held our roof up. There were giggles from the next room, followed by the angry whispers of my wife telling the girls to keep quiet lest they wanted to wake me. I smiled, couldn't help it. I sat up and shuffled over to the doorway. My hips and shoulders hurt something fierce, and my head felt like it was going to bust open at any moment. I had to steady myself before I fell over. Oh, look, you woke up your father. He's going to be mighty angry with you. I walked over to the table and sat in the chair. It's okay, honey. I was already awake. The girls giggled again and ran over to me. They were like two little angels with hair the color of a wheat field and eyes bluer than a cornflower. I scooped them up into a big hug and held them tight. They groaned and tried to get away, but I didn't want to let them go. I took in a deep breath, and my heart skipped a beat. They smelled like dead leaves and rotting meat. I dropped them to the ground, and they snapped like dried twigs. They continued to giggle. My wife ambled up behind me, lumbering like some great beast. He's going to be mighty angry with you. Her voice was dry and raspy. She placed a hand on my shoulder, and it was rough and skeletal. I didn't want to turn around, but she placed another hand on the other shoulder and spun me around with profound strength. I screamed and screamed until my throat was raw. I screamed until someone shook me so hard my teeth rattled. Wake up. It is a dream. It was Sandy's voice. I was next to the fire, wrapped in 3 blankets. I scrambled backward and shed the blankets like a snakeskin. "Where am I? What's going on?" Sandy placed another log on the fire and looked at me. His eyes were bloodshot, and his skin was almost as white as the snow. "You are back at camp." I looked around. There wasn't anyone else. I remembered Walter had run off, and Colt was gone. "Old Tommy?" Sandy shook his head. "Left before midday." "Damn it." "He said he was not going to die out here waiting for you to get back." It sounded like Tommy. "Why didn't you go with him?" Sandy looked at me and gave me a pained smile. "I'm already dead. I'm waiting for my spirit to realize it." "Nonsense. Let's get the hell out of here. I have no idea where Walter went, but Colt's dead. So is the posse." "I'm not going anywhere." Well, I sure as shit wasn't going to stick around and freeze to death. I got up and shuffled over to my horse. At least Tommy had the decency to leave it behind, though I surmised it was more for speed than doing me any favors. I got into the saddle and my back screamed at me to stop. I needed a bottle of whiskey and a week's worth of sleep. I looked over to Sandy and found him staring back at me. "What's out there?" I asked. "Our sins, coming for us. We are bad men. Our days of robbing and fighting could not last forever." "That doesn't make a lick of sense," I said. "It doesn't have to. I wanted to be with my family, not up here freezing to death." I gave a nod to Sandy, who nodded back. It was going to be the last time I ever saw him, I knew that much. With that, I kicked my horse and headed down the trail. I needed to get off this cursed mountain and into a warm saloon soon, or I was going to be as dead as everyone else. Old Tommy's tracks were easy to follow in the snow. It wasn't the usual route to Ashley, but perhaps he was still trying to avoid the posse. Tommy had no idea that the posse wasn't a threat anymore. I didn't want to be alone, so I kicked my horse into a run and hoped I could catch up. His tracks wound up a hillside and back down again. A large pond that was starting to ice over came into view. Way on the other side, 2 figures stepped out from the trees. One waved at me with jerky movements. The other didn't have a head. It was the Rockgut twins. I looked away and went faster. I didn't look back, afraid of what I might see, but the weight of the forest watching me was heavier than a wet wool blanket. The wind rushed past my ears and bit the skin on my face, but I didn't dare slow down. If I did, they would catch me. "Dada?" The voice came out of nowhere, and my horse whinnied and reared back, dumping me into the snow. Before I could get up and grab the reins, it took off screaming and wide-eyed. "Damn it, get back here!" It was hopeless, though. That horse was halfway to Fort Bridger by now. I sat there in the snow, not sure what to do next. There was a snap of a branch, and the woods fell silent. I spun around. There, at the edge of the pines, was a group of aspen trees. Had they been there before? I didn't notice any aspens when I had ridden by, just pines. The hair on the back of my neck stood, and a shiver ran through my body. I stood and followed Tommy's trail. Thankfully, it led away from those trees, as the eye-like knots watched my every movement, hungry as if I were a prize. As I crunched through frost-encrusted snow, there was another sound. At first, I thought it was just me walking, but I would stop, and it continued. A low creak and snap as wood moved. I spun around to find the aspen trees still there, but they had changed location. They were spread out, not just in a clump together. I picked up the pace and started to run. As I did, the Rockgut twins started singing from the timber. Their song rose into the air and wavered. It was the same song they sang the night before, but it lacked joy. Instead, it was rushed, like they were forced to sing it faster than normal. It picked up tempo, and the Rockgut twins sang louder. I moved as fast as I could, and Tommy's trail started to go down a hill. The pines gave way to more and more aspen the further down I went. They were all watching me, and I swore I could hear them breathing, laughing, and mocking me as I went. Then came a thunderous crack that echoed through the draw and ripped through my ears. I couldn't help but let out a cry and drop to my knees. There were creaks and groans from behind me. I didn't want to look. I wanted to keep going and find Tommy, but I couldn't help it. All of the aspens were bent toward me, their branches pointing at me like accusing fingers. A shadow of movement caught my eye, and I slowly turned my head. Standing there, in the trees, was Walter. His eyes were gone, and the pits looked like the knots in the trees. His grin was wide, much wider than it should have been. He pointed at me and opened his mouth. The Rotgut's song came from deep inside him as his mouth stayed open and unmoving. Down near the aspen trees, feel the fear, hear the screams. Down near the aspen trees. What have you seen? What do you see when you look at me? Down near the aspen trees. With those creaks and groans of branch and bone, we'll grind your bones to dust and stone. Walter turned his head until he was looking right at me. He moved his arm and pointed a finger, and when he did, it sounded like trees moaning in the wind. His mouth was still open, but the song had stopped. What came out of his mouth next was more horrifying than anything else. "You're never here anymore. I just don't feel safe. I'm taking the girls with me and going back home." My wife's voice floated from deep inside Walter's body and got louder and louder until it came from every direction. I covered my eyes and dropped to my knees. "This ain't real! You ain't real!" I screamed until my voice was shredded and broken. When I opened my eyes, there were aspens all around me, staring at me with their black and dead eyes. I came to, walking down the trail. I don't know how long I had been walking, but the sun was setting. I was shivering something fierce and couldn't feel my feet anymore. My legs were stiff. I wanted to tear my boots off and look, but I was afraid of what I'd find. I was afraid they'd be wood. I stumbled down the path, catching glimpses of things moving in the trees, eyes that caught the setting sunlight just right and glowed, a clawed hand caressing a tree trunk. And the whispers, dear God, the whispers. They came from the timber and told me things I never wanted to hear, things I dare not repeat. The trail became steep and I slipped in the snow. I hit a rock with my hip on the way down and cried out as fire burned down my leg and up my back. I rolled to the bottom and just lay there for a moment, wishing I was dead. The dead see things. They can see you. There was another sound nearby, the crack and pop of a fire and the huff and shuffle of a horse. The pleasant aroma of coffee wafted into my nose, and for a moment I thought perhaps I had died and this was heaven. But the pain in my back and the cold seeping into my body argued otherwise. Besides, I had a feeling I wasn't destined for heaven. I rolled to my stomach and pushed myself up to my knees. When I stood, the pain in my hip came alive like someone had poked me with a branding iron. I wobbled to a tree and leaned against it for support. It moved when I touched it, slithered like a bark-covered snake. I hobbled to the fire. Old Tommy sat next to it, warming up his hands. "You made it. I always knew you would." "What the hell is going on?" I asked. Old Tommy poured a cup of coffee and handed it to me. I took it and just held my hands around the cup for warmth. My fingers were red and blistered. "Seems like we've gotten trapped here. Whatever lives in these woods doesn't want us to leave. I tried every trail I knew but kept ending up here," he said. "But why? Why is it happening?" Old Tommy sighed and poured himself a cup of coffee. "My grandpapa used to tell me stories of the deep timber, how if you went waltzing in them woods and brought a sour heart that sometimes it would attract the attention of them trees and those dark things that lived in them. He said, always stay on the trails and try and keep that bitterness in the foothills, for the timber was a place a violent man could meet a violent end." He took his pipe out and lit it, and when the match flared to life, the firelight exposed his eyes. They were tree knots, twisted and black. Tommy looked at me and smiled. His skin cracked around his lips and on his cheeks. I turned to run and was surrounded by trees. They moved in on me, so thick I couldn't see through them. I let out a yell and jumped on Tommy's horse. We beat hell out of that meadow. The trees scratched at my face and grabbed my clothes. Their bony fingers dug into skin and burrowed as deep as they could as I raced past, but I didn't care. Blood ran freely into my eyes and I could barely see. I never looked back, and I pushed that horse until it died on that mountainside. Once it fell, I got up and ran. I ran as far as I could until up was down and left was right. They say when I stumbled into the streets of Ashley, I was covered in mud and blood and had a crazed look in my eye. They say it took 4 men to hold me down so the doc could fix me up. But I don't remember any of it. All I remember is the trees, those damned trees everywhere looking at me. The trees were one of the reasons why I was so nervous to go back east to find my family. There were so many trees out that way. Perhaps once I found them, we could go somewhere where there weren't any trees. I held the train ticket in my hand. A small thing, but it was heavier than a sack of gold nuggets. Just looking at the damn thing got my heart running wild. "Coming home," I said, barely more than a whisper. The train rumbled toward the station, spewing black smoke and screaming like a hellhound. It lumbered to a stop in front of me, and for a few moments all I could do was stare at it. This damned thing would take me back to my girls, and that was that. I was done running and gunning. I'd take a job cutting down trees or moving cattle, anything to keep them in my life. As soon as I could, I boarded the train and found a seat. I let out a sigh and sank into the cushioned bench. I closed my eyes and just let everything go. The sounds of folks boarding the train and engaging in idle chatter filled my head. But there was something else. A sound that sort of tiptoed through the rest of the noise. Like branches swaying in a breeze behind me. My eyes shot open, and I spun around in my chair. A woman wearing a blue dress recoiled in her seat and looked at me with wide, fright-filled eyes. I searched, but I couldn't find anything out of the ordinary. "Sorry, ma'am." She shot me an icy look and moved to another seat, muttering about the train letting on certain types of people or some sort of nonsense. I faced forward and rubbed at my temples. Since my ordeal in the woods, the smallest thing set me on edge. I closed my eyes and rested my head against the window. When I woke, the train was moving and we were somewhere in the plains. Rolling hills covered with grass filled the view as far as the eye could see. The wind blew and the grass gave its best impression of the ocean. Best of all, there were no trees. My neck ached from sleeping in an odd position for too long. It was stiff and cracked when I moved it. I rubbed at the back of my neck with my hand and stopped when my fingers brushed against something hard. It was like a scab, but harder. I picked at it, and pain jumped through my whole body. Pain or not, I was damned curious now. I gritted my teeth and grabbed onto a bit of the hard substance and pulled. Fire ran down my neck and my stomach lurched. I let out a grunt of pain, but I pulled some more. Whatever it was attached and pulled my skin along with it, tearing a bit. I yanked harder. With one final pull, it tore free, taking a strip of flesh along as a prize. My hands were shaking as I brought the hard piece around to take a look. Sweat poured down my face, and my breathing was haggard. I held a bloody strip of skin in my fingers. I flipped it over and immediately threw it on the floor. It was a piece of bark. Someone started humming a tune behind me, the same tune the rock guts had sung back in the timber. I whirled and searched the faces of the passengers, looking for Colt or Walter. There he was. He sat at the very back with his hat brim pulled so low it hid his face. But nothing could hide that mess of hair that was redder than a young boy's face visiting a brothel for the first time. I stood and drew my pistol. The nearby passengers gasped and shrank away from me like I was a monster. There were screams and guffaws as I passed by. One cowpoke stood up, thinking he was going to be a hero or something. "Now put that gun away like a good boy before anyone gets hurt." I turned my attention to the man and sneered. "This ain't any of your business. Now get out of the way." "Want to think twice about that?" He pulled his jacket to the side and exposed a tin star on his vest. His other hand rested on the ivory-handled grip of his pistol holstered on his hip. My mind raced. I couldn't make a scene, not when I was so close to getting back to my family. But on the other hand, he was back there waiting. I glanced at the back of the train, but the man was gone. I looked everywhere, but couldn't find him. Okay. Sorry about that. Just had a bit to drink and a bad dream." I put my pistol away and put my hands in the air. "You just sit down, be quiet, and don't make any more fuss, and we'll forget this ever happened. Got it?" I wanted to bash the lawman's skull in and crack his bones like twigs. I rubbed at my head. "Of course, Marshal, of course." I went and sat back in my seat. A few of the nearby passengers got up and moved away from me. Couldn't blame them one bit. The rest of the train ride passed without event. I spent most of the time trying to sleep and avoid the marshal. I kept an eye out for the red-haired stranger, but I couldn't find him again. After a long journey, the train finally stopped at my destination. I stepped off onto the platform and took a deep breath. The air here was different, hard to explain. I much preferred the mountains, or should I say I used to prefer the mountains. But in those ancient peaks was where the timber grew thick. Perhaps it would be better for a change of pace, and I knew it would be better with my wife and girls. The marshal walked off the train and shot me a look. He'd been eyeing me the whole train ride, and I figured he might have half an idea on who I was. I was wanted in a couple of the territories. He started to walk towards me. I pulled my hat low and walked away from him and into the biggest crowd I could find. I pushed through the people and slipped into a nearby alley. The alley smelled of piss, and the muffled off-key tune from a saloon piano came through a nearby wall. Sun crept through the buildings in such a way that the marshal's shadow splayed across one of the buildings. It grew bigger as he neared. I ducked behind a stack of boxes and drew my gun. I didn't want to kill the man, but I didn't go through hell and come all this way just to end up in jail. The shadow stopped as the marshal rounded the corner. I wanted to peek over the boxes and see if it really was him or just some passerby, but I didn't want to give away my position. He started to come closer, moving slowly. I pulled the hammer back on my gun and winced as it clicked into place, sure the marshal heard it. He moved even closer. When he stepped, his joints creaked. Those creaks and groans of branch and bone. That humming started again, the same humming from the train. The shadow started to run towards me. It moved in a jerky motion like it was a scarecrow that had come to life. The creaks and cracks got louder as it closed the distance. I scrambled backward but couldn't quite get any traction in the dirt. Just as it was almost upon me, it stopped. The boxes obscured most of it from view, but the top of its hat let me know it was standing there. It spoke. With those creaks and groans of branch and bone, we'll grind your bones to dust and stone. Its voice, it was deep, and it didn't sound like anything a human being should have sounded like. It was like the woods moving and the bugs buzzing. It was like a mountain lion screaming. It was like the wind ripping the flesh from bone. A strong gust of wind blew through the alley. It kicked up dust that got in my eyes, and I had to snap them shut or go blind. I threw my hand up to protect my face, but just as fast as the gust had come, it was gone. I wiped my eyes clear, and the man was gone. I stood and pointed my gun down the alley. My hand was shaking so bad I was afraid I was going to send a round through the saloon wall on accident. I couldn't find the stranger. The only thing left was a few aspen leaves sitting in a pile behind the boxes. I found my way to the house easily enough. Her father ran a sawmill and had made a name for himself. He owned a large estate outside of town. I walked up the steps to the front door and hesitated before I knocked. I caught a glimpse of myself in the window and lamented my current state. My eyes were bloodshot and sunken with exhaustion. I was covered in dirt and dust, and there were tears in my shirt. From when? I didn't want to think about it. I found my grit and knocked on the door. A moment later, it opened, and I found myself face to face with her father. He was a tall man, thin to the point of being skeletal. He sported a bushy mustache that was the color of ash and hung off his face and below his chin. His eyes narrowed when he saw me. He opened his mouth about to spit some curses my way, I was sure. I put my hand up to stop him. I don't want to fight. I came back because I know I made some mistakes, and I want to make amends. I just want to be with my family now. I want to see my girls. He looked at me for a moment, before spitting on the ground. He wiped his mouth with a kerchief and spun on his heel. I halfway expected him to slam the door in my face, and that would be it. But he took a few steps down the hall and stopped. When he noticed that I was still standing in the doorway, he motioned for me to follow him. My heart lifted, and I bounded into the house after him. He led me through the main room, past the kitchen where his staff was preparing dinner. I didn't realize how hungry I was until that wonderful scent of venison stew hit my nose. My stomach growled, and I had to stop myself from grabbing a slice of cheese off the counter as we passed by. I was here to make a good impression, and I'd be damned if a little thing like hunger was going to ruin it any further. He led me to the back and opened the door. "Well, go on then," he said. His voice was gruff. I wasn't too sure what was going on or why he wanted me to go out into the backyard. Then I heard it, the laughter of my little girls. I stepped out of the house and couldn't stop the tears from welling up. There they were, my two beautiful girls, running in the grass, chasing a couple of butterflies. Their long blonde hair flew wild as they ran, and I couldn't help but laugh. They had definitely gotten their mother's hair. The laugh caught their attention. and their eyes lit up like the sun when they saw me.
Dada!
I dropped to one knee and caught them as they ran into my embrace. I hugged them so tight and close and simply basked in their smell. I kissed their heads and kept hugging them. Daddy's home, my angels.
For how long?
For good this time.
Is that so?
My wife asked from behind me. I let my girls go and stood to face her. She wore a gray skirt with a white top. Her hair was pulled up with a loose strand dangling in front of her face. Her eyes were wet with tears as well, and she was trying to be stern with me, but I could tell she missed me just as much as I missed her. I took 2 steps forward and picked her up off the ground and spun her in the air. She let out a little squeal, and the girls giggled. I let her feet touch the ground and pulled her close and kissed her. Her lips were warm and tasted slightly of peppermint. It's so, I said. I promise, no more outlawing for me. I'm done. She didn't say any words, but her eyes told me everything. She hugged me tightly. The girls resumed their pursuit of the elusive butterflies. I sat on the porch and wondered why I had ever left in the first place. As I sat there, something caught my eye. Something nestled back in the hickory trees. I stood up and walked towards it. It was white. My legs began to shake as I walked. It couldn't be. There, standing alone amongst the ancient hickory trees, was a lone aspen. My girls ran towards me, and their bones creaked and groaned.
That was C.R. Langille's The Deep Timber, as read by Andrew Gibson. Andrew was pulled feet first from the swamps of South Louisiana, kicking and screaming, and he remains mostly as such to this day. You can find his work on Audible under Andrew Gibson, or for the more romantically inclined, Blake Lockhart. You can also catch him streaming his recording sessions live in the Narrator Nook and the Haven Discord servers. Links are in the show notes. Thank you, Andrew. Well, children of the night, the hour is late, and we've run out of tales to tell. For now. Tales to Terrify is made possible by the tremendous generosity of our supporters on Patreon and PayPal. Incredible fans like Lestle Baxter, Amanda Carrillo, Amanda Gottfried, and Orion D. Hegre, whose generous support keeps these lights on and flickering ominously. If you're not a supporter, head over to patreon.com/Tales to Terrify. You'll find all kinds of perks, like ad-free episodes, bonus content, and one-of-a-kind collectibles. Every dollar goes back into this show, and we appreciate your support so much. Want another way to support the show that doesn't cost you a cent? Head over to Podchaser, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts and drop us a 5-star review. You'll not only put an unnaturally wide smile on our faces, but help new listeners discover our terrifying tales too. You can show your love of the show out in the world with some Tales to Terrify merch. TalesToTerrify.com/merch will take you to our TeePublic store, where we've got a great collection of creepy custom and curated designs. Tales to Terrify is produced by Seth Williams, Meredith Morgenstern, Andrew Gibson, Crystal Hammond, Spencer Disparty, and myself, Drew Sebastini, with original theme by Nebulous Entertainment. Tales to Terrify is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license. Join us again next week as we flee for our lives from more Tales to Terrify.